My Lords, we have an opportunity to right an old wrong and to prevent a new injustice. We have an opportunity to stop the handover of tens of millions of pounds a year, billions in total, in order to fund taxes somewhere else while taxes are rising, tax cuts somewhere else while taxes are rising here. We have the opportunity to prevent the handover of strategic territory to a state that may come under the influence of unfriendly powers. And above all, we have the ability to stand up belatedly for the injured party here, the Chagosian people. Sitting silently in the gallery throughout your Lordship's debate has been a contingent of our friends from the British Indian Ocean Territory. Their role as silent spectators has been eerily symbolic of the role that they have played these past 50 years, and especially these last 5 years, as decisions about them have been made without them. But we have the opportunity to go in a different direction. Article 18 of the treaty makes clear that it cannot enter into force until both parties have informed each other that they have concluded all the national ratificatory procedures. And I'm just going to remind noble lords one more time of what the Labour manifesto said about this. My noble friend Lord Callanan quoted it. Defending our security also means protecting the British overseas territories. Labour will always defend their sovereignty and right to self-determination. Now, my lords, I would argue that under the Salisbury Convention, it works both ways. I think you could at least make the claim that this chamber has not just the opportunity, but the duty to enforce the manifesto on which Labour was elected. And that means recognising the self-determination of the Chagosian people. Why are we doing this? I'm not going to repeat my noble friend Lord Lilly's speech. There was no legal obligation. For one thing, military facilities are excluded from the purview of these courts, but even if you set that aside, it was expressly drawn up in the clearest language that our lawyers could devise that there was no purview for a court like this in a dispute between two present or former members of the Commonwealth. That was expressly put in to prevent challenges of this kind. I think we all know the answer, and we heard it from the noble lady Baroness Hoey a second ago. There is a clique of people, and it is a clique. I can't help noticing from the sparse benches opposite that there is no great enthusiasm from the governing party for this measure. There is a clique of people for whom decolonise is everything. It is painful for them to see little Union Jacks in the upper corners of flats. And they approach these questions impressionistically, based on vibes, based on emotions, almost regardless of the legal rights and wrongs or the interests of the people concerned. So confronted with it, it's actually very clear in Philippe Sands' book, which he wrote about the whole process. It's very clear how he and the Attorney General, and I suspect the Prime Minister, have come at this. That you must always back the ex-colony against the ex-colonizer. Always back the poorer state against the Western one. Always back the non-white population against the white one, regardless of the rights and wrongs. Even though the people being injured here are, of course, the dispossessed Chagosians. Even as a decolonised exercise, it totally fails in its own terms, because here is a territory now being handed to a genuinely colonial power that has no interest in it, no connection, except a pecuniary one. I'm not going to get into the ecological arguments. They were so well stated by Lord Thurlow, or indeed the strategic ones that we've heard from other people. But I just want to in order to emphasise the wrong done to the Chagosian population, I just want to canter through very briefly some of the history. The archipelago was uninhabited until 1783. The French then populated it with enslaved people taken from the African mainland. It was seized during the Napoleonic Wars by, or it wasn't seized, but the Indian Ocean French-speaking territories were seized by the Royal Navy, actually dramatically rendered in one of the Patrick O'Brien novels. And at the end of that war, in 1814, Mauritius and the Chagos Islands were separately ceded to the British Crown. The Chagos Islands were never part of Mauritius. That's right. They were administered from Mauritius because there was no suitable administrative seat in the archipelago. But I'm just going to invite you, my lords, to entertain for a moment seriously the claim that because somewhere was once administered from somewhere else, that creates a sovereignty claim. By that logic, Anguilla would be part of St. Kitts. The Turks and Caicos Islands would be part of Jamaica. Indeed, come to that, Burma would be part of India. It is a ludicrous argument, an incredibly dangerous precedent that we're setting, not only for our fellow subjects in other overseas territories, such as Gibraltar and the Falklands, but indeed for any other country that was ever administered from somewhere else, which is a great many places on the planet. Fast forward to 1965, and as we've heard, the Mauritian government accepted and gladly pocketed the then huge sum of £3 million in return for renouncing in perpetuity any claim to the Chagos archipelago. And they were far from unhappy about that, because this was a territory to which they were unconnected, and they saw this as an extremely good deal. Let me quote what the then Prime Minister, Sir Siwasago Ramgoolam, said shortly afterwards. He said this was a territory of which very few people knew, which is very far from us, and which we never visited. And that, as far as he was concerned, was that. The deal was done, and indeed, Mauritius then pocketed some further funds that were handed over by this country, supposedly for the betterment of the Chagosian diaspora, although a lot of that money somehow never quite trickled through to the people it was supposed to help. Indeed, a lot of the bad feeling of the diaspora population towards Mauritius stems from the way in which those funds have been dispersed down the decades. It was really only 15 or so years ago, as China began to become interested in Mauritius, that the claim was being pressed again in earnest. We had a state visit from the Chinese head of state, an unusual thing for a country the size of Mauritius. The first free trade agreement with any African state, I think, between China and an African state was with Mauritius. And at that point, suddenly, Mauritius became very interested in exercising sovereignty over this territory. And can you blame them? Right? It's been referred to aptly as the Malta of the Indian Ocean. Of the 7 great naval choke points in the world, it's within reach of 4 of them: the Bab el Mandeb, the Straits of Hormuz, the Malacca Strait, and the Cape of Good Hope. It was from the Diego Garcia base in 1991 that the waves of B-52 bombers took off to topple Saddam Hussein's regime. It was from there that a brave part of the campaign against the Taliban was waged. It's worth noting, if we're playing the game of decolonize, that for a diaspora Chagosian to dispute Mauritian sovereignty is an imprisonable offence under a law passed in 2021. Simply to say what I'm saying would get me a spell in chokey if I were in Mauritius. But, my lords, there is an alternative solution, and I think it was touched on by the noble lady Baroness Foster, and I really want to put this forward, because it's not just that we're stopping this. We've got to have an alternative, and it was one, actually, that was initially looked at when Tony Blair was Prime Minister. He commissioned a feasibility study by KPMG into resettling the Chagosian populations on the outer atolls. And the feasibility study came back much later and said that it could be done for the cost of £3 billion over a century, which, in a rather short-sighted move, the subsequent Conservative government decided was too big an outlay during the time of austerity. But even if we accept the noble lady the Minister's figures on the liability to British taxpayers, and I suspect that my noble friend Baroness Noakes is much closer to the actual sum, but even on the government's figures, that is still a lot more expensive than putting in the infrastructure and resettling the Chagosian population as British subjects in a British overseas territory. And that would put forever beyond doubt, because it would then be an inhabited territory, the sovereignty claim. It would then be up to the people there, and only up to them if they wanted to change their sovereignty. My lords, when this government took office, it promised growth. And actually what we're seeing is that it's delivering shrinkage in every sense: economically, morally, and physically, geographically. If this bill goes through, and we compound the injustice to our fellow subjects of Chagosian descent, we will be, in every sense, diminished as a country. Yeah.